In the heart of San Francisco's Chinatown, on a late autumn afternoon in 1965, something extraordinary happened. Something that would be retold in whispers, then conversations, then eventually legends. Over 100 people witnessed an event that would define not just a man, but an entire philosophy of life, dignity, and martial arts. This is the true story of the day Bruce Lee faced down hatred with nothing but skill, courage, and an unshakable belief in human dignity. But to understand what happened that day, we must first understand the world Bruce Lee inhabited in 1965. America in 1965 was a nation in transformation. The civil rights movement was reaching its crescendo. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was leading marches. Malcolm X had just been assassinated. The Vietnam War was escalating, sending young Americans to fight in a distant land many couldn't locate on a map. And in this America, being Asian meant something very specific. It meant being seen as perpetually foreign, no matter where you were born. It meant facing stereotypes that painted you as weak, submissive, exotic, mysterious, or dangerous, sometimes all at once. In San Francisco's Chinatown, nestled between the fragrant smoke of incense shops and the chatter of Cantonese vendors, lived a young man of 24 years named Ch0ng. But the world would come to know him by another name: Bruce Lee. Bruce was unlike the traditional kung fu masters of Chinatown. He questioned everything. He challenged the old ways. He believed that martial arts should evolve, should be practical, should be available to everyone, not locked away in traditional schools that only taught students of the correct ethnicity. This philosophy made him controversial. Some of the old masters saw him as a traitor to tradition. But Bruce didn't care about tradition for tradition's sake. He cared about truth, about what worked, about breaking down barriers. He had recently begun teaching what he called Ch0ng, the way of the intercepting fist. It wasn't a style, it was a philosophy. Take what is useful, discard what is not. Add what is uniquely your own. And on this particular October afternoon, Bruce Lee's philosophy would be tested in the most direct way possible. It was around 5:30 in the evening. The sun was beginning its descent behind the San Francisco skyline, painting the narrow streets of Chinatown in golden light. Bruce had just finished teaching a small class of students in his makeshift school, really just a rented space above Mr. Wang's tea shop on Grant Avenue. He was carrying his small gym bag, wearing simple black pants and a fitted white shirt. Those who knew Bruce would tell you that even the way he walked was different. Every movement was precise, economical, purposeful. There was no wasted motion in anything Bruce Lee did. He was taking a shortcut through a narrow alley, a passage between Grant Avenue and the street where his small apartment was located. It was a route he'd taken hundreds of times before. But today was different. At the entrance to the alley stood a group of 5 men. At their center was a man locals knew all too well: Tommy "Bruiser" Malone. Tommy was a street thug, a small-time enforcer who collected protection money from businesses, ran illegal gambling operations, and generally made life difficult for anyone who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. Tommy was a large man, over 6 feet tall, probably 220 pounds, with the kind of muscle that came from hard labor and harder living. He had a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a permanent reminder of a knife fight in his youth. His knuckles were scarred and calloused. This was a man who solved problems with violence. Bruce approached, intending to pass by quietly, but Tommy stepped into his path. The casual observer might have thought this was a random encounter, but those who knew the neighborhood understood the truth. Tommy had been waiting. He'd heard about this young Chinese man who was teaching martial arts to white students, to black students, to anyone who wanted to learn. Tommy didn't like it. It upset the order of things, and perhaps, deep down, Tommy felt threatened. Here was this smaller man, this foreigner, though Bruce had been born in San Francisco, who carried himself with a confidence that Tommy's violence could never achieve. Bruce attempted to step around. Tommy blocked him again. The smile on Tommy's face was not friendly. It was the smile of a predator who had cornered prey. Bruce spoke calmly, his voice even and controlled. He said he had no business with Tommy, that he simply wanted to pass through. But Tommy wasn't interested in letting him pass. What happened next would be burned into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. Tommy began with words. But these weren't just any words. They were racial slurs, stereotypes, mockery of the worst kind. He attacked Bruce's appearance, his heritage, his very right to exist in this country. He used terms that cannot and should not be repeated. Words designed to dehumanize, to humiliate, to reduce a person to nothing more than a stereotype. He mocked Bruce's accent, though Bruce spoke perfect English. He imitated Asian languages in that grotesque sing-song way that racists have done for generations. He called Bruce names that implied weakness, foreignness, unworthiness. And all the while, a crowd was gathering. This is something important to understand about Chinatown in 1965. News traveled fast. Windows had eyes. Alleys had ears. Within minutes of Tommy stopping Bruce, people began to appear. First a few, then a dozen, then dozens more. They gathered at the alley entrance. They opened windows in the apartments above. They stepped out onto fire escapes and balconies. Shopkeepers left their stores. Elderly women paused with their shopping bags. Young men leaned against walls, watching. By the time Tommy had finished his verbal assault, there were at least 50 people watching. And that number would only grow. Throughout this barrage of hatred, Bruce Lee stood still. His breathing remained controlled. His hands stayed, relaxed at his sides. His face showed no anger, no fear, no shame. Just calm, focused attention. Those who were close enough to see his eyes said later that something had changed in them. Not rage. Bruce Lee didn't do rage. But focus, absolute, laser-like focus. The kind of focus that comes from years of meditation and training, the kind that allows you to be fully present in a moment of crisis. When Tommy finally paused in his tirade, Bruce spoke. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the watching crowd, every word carried. He asked Tommy if he was finished. Finished with the insults. Because, Bruce explained, words were just air. They revealed more about the speaker than the target. They showed Tommy's fear. This was not what Tommy expected. He expected begging, or cowering, or apologies. He expected submission. Instead, he got philosophical analysis. Tommy's face turned red. He pushed Bruce hard in the chest, a shove meant to knock a smaller man backward to assert physical dominance. But Bruce barely moved. His feet seemed rooted to the ground, his center of gravity perfectly balanced. The shove that should have sent him stumbling backward merely rocked him slightly, like a tree swaying in the wind. Bruce explained, still calmly, that Tommy was pushing because he had no arguments. He was insulting because he had no character. And he was doing all of this in front of an audience because he needed witnesses to validate his power. The crowd had now swelled to nearly 80 people. Word was spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Something was happening on Morrison Alley. Something big. Tommy's friend stood behind him, uncertain. They'd seen Tommy in fights before, usually against people who were drunk or outnumbered or unprepared, but this quiet young man who wouldn't be intimidated? This was different. Tommy made his fatal decision. He reached behind his back and pulled out a handgun. The moment the gun appeared, several things happened, simultaneously. The crowd gasped. Some screamed. People began backing away, pulling children behind them. Someone yelled, "Gun!" in English. Someone else shouted, "Ch0ng!" Gun? in Cantonese. Tommy's friends looked nervous now. Pulling a gun was different from pushing someone around. This could bring serious police attention. But Tommy was beyond reason now. His ego had been challenged in front of nearly 100 people. He couldn't back down. He waved the gun, pointing it vaguely in Bruce's direction, trying to use it as a tool of intimidation. And through all of this, Bruce Lee did not move, did not flinch, did not show even a flicker of fear. Later, people would ask him about this moment. How was it possible to face a loaded gun with such calm? Bruce's answer was simple but profound. Fear is a signal, not a command. You acknowledge it, you notice it, but you don't let it control your actions. In that moment, facing Tommy Malone's gun, Bruce's mind was working through calculations. Distance, about 4 feet. Tommy's grip, poor, holding the gun too loosely. Tommy's stance, weight too far forward, unbalanced. Tommy's emotional state, agitated, not thinking clearly. Bruce spoke again, his voice even quieter now. He told Tommy that the gun didn't make him strong. It made him afraid. That's why he needed it. That's why he needed the insults. He was trying to feel bigger than he actually was. The crowd was absolutely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. Nearly 100 people, barely breathing, watching this confrontation. Tommy screamed at Bruce, waving the gun more aggressively. He demanded respect. He demanded fear. He demanded submission. And then he made his critical mistake. Instead of keeping his distance, instead of using the gun's range advantage, Tommy stepped forward. He tried to strike Bruce with the gun itself, to pistol whip him, to use it as a club. It was an act of rage, not strategy. What happened next occurred in less than 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds would be discussed, analyzed, and retold for decades to come. Witnesses would later disagree on some details. Some swore Bruce moved so fast he seemed to blur. Others said it looked almost slow, like a dance in perfect control. But on the fundamental facts, everyone agreed. Second one. Bruce's right hand moved, not in a wild swing, not in a desperate grab, but with surgical precision. It struck Tommy's wrist at exactly the correct angle, with exactly the correct force. The sound was distinct, a sharp crack that echoed off the alley walls. Tommy's grip broke instantly. The gun flew from his hand in a perfect arc, traveling nearly 15 feet before clattering onto the pavement. Second 2. Before Tommy's brain could even process what had happened to his gun hand, Bruce's left fist was already in motion. It struck Tommy square in the solar plexus, the complex nerve center just below the sternum. The hit was precise, controlled, and devastatingly effective. All the air evacuated from Tommy's lungs. His diaphragm spasmed. His body's automatic system screamed for oxygen. Second 3. As Tommy gasped for air, his body automatically bending forward, Bruce executed a perfect leg sweep, low, fast, and unavoidable. Tommy's feet left the ground. 220 pounds of muscle and ego crashed onto the concrete alley floor. The impact was loud, definitive, final. The entire sequence, disarm, strike, sweep, had taken 2.8 seconds. And in that moment, Tommy Malone sealed his fate. Tommy lay on the ground, gasping for air, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. He tried to get up, but Bruce's foot was already there. Not stomping, not kicking, but simply placed on Tommy's chest with perfect control. Bruce spoke, his voice still calm, still measured. He told Tommy to stay down. Tommy struggled against the foot, trying to rise, his hand scrabbling at Bruce's ankle. In his desperate movements, his belt buckle loosened. His pants began to slide down. He was trying to fight, trying to stand, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, all at the same time. He couldn't. Tommy's friends took a step forward, perhaps thinking they should help. Bruce looked at them, just one look, one slight movement of his free hand in their direction. And they froze. Something in his eyes told them that intervening would be a very bad idea. Bruce looked back down at Tommy, who was still struggling on the ground, one hand holding up his sliding pants, the other trying to push Bruce's foot away. And then Bruce spoke the words that would echo through Chinatown for years. He told Tommy that Tommy had come here to humiliate him, to show the crowd what a big man Tommy was, to feel powerful by making someone who looked different feel small. But Bruce hadn't humiliated Tommy. Tommy had humiliated himself. With his insults, with his violence, with his gun. And now, lying on the ground in front of nearly 100 witnesses, unable to even keep his pants up, Tommy had completed his own humiliation. Bruce stepped back, removing his foot, allowing Tommy to stand. The crowd watched in absolute silence as Tommy scrambled to his feet, holding his pants up with both hands now, his face red with shame and suppressed rage. He looked at Bruce. He looked at the gun lying 15 feet away. He looked at the crowd of watching eyes. Tommy spat out a threat. This wasn't over, he said. He'd be back. He'd get revenge. Bruce's response was simple and final. Yes, it was over. Tommy's friends rushed forward, helping him away from the scene. One of them picked up the gun. They retreated down the alley, the crowd parting to let them through. As they disappeared around the corner, you could hear Tommy's voice, still making threats, still trying to salvage his pride. But the moment they were out of sight, the crowd erupted. The reaction was unlike anything the neighborhood had seen. Nearly 100 people all began talking at once, voices overlapping in English, Cantonese, Mandarin, and half a dozen other languages. An elderly Chinese man, tears in his eyes, proclaimed that this was real kung fu. True mastery. He had seen many demonstrations, many performances, but never had he witnessed such perfect application of technique under real pressure. A young woman couldn't stop talking about Bruce's speed. Had anyone seen how fast he moved? It was inhuman, supernatural. She'd blinked and missed half of it. A middle-aged businessman kept repeating the same observation. Bruce wasn't afraid of the gun, not even a little. How was that possible? What kind of training, what kind of mind allows a person to face a loaded weapon without fear? A young student, maybe 19 years old, was doing calculations aloud. To achieve that kind of speed, that kind of precision, Bruce must have been training for decades. 20 years minimum, maybe more. How old was he? 24? How was it possible? But beneath all the excitement, beneath all the awe, there was something else, something deeper. The Chinese community of San Francisco in 1965 lived with a constant undercurrent of caution. Don't make trouble. Don't attract attention. Don't give them a reason to notice you. Keep your head down. Be polite. Be submissive. Survive. And here was Bruce Lee, who had done the opposite of all of that. He had stood up. He had refused to be humiliated. He had defended himself with skill and dignity. And he had won. For many in that crowd, especially the older generation, this was revolutionary. More than a fight, it was a statement. We don't have to accept disrespect. We don't have to bow our heads. We have the right to dignity. Bruce raised his hand, asking for quiet. The crowd gradually settled, though the buzz of conversation continued in whispers. What he said next surprised many of them. Bruce told the crowd that what they had witnessed was not a cause for celebration. Confused looks rippled through the assembled people. Not a cause for celebration? But he had won. He had defeated the bully. Justice had been served. Bruce shook his head. Martial arts, he explained, are not about fighting. They are about discipline, control, respect. If he had truly wanted to hurt Tommy, he could have, easily. But that wasn't the point. That was never the point. He paused, looking at the faces surrounding him, young and old, Chinese and non-Chinese, all watching him with rapt attention. Bruce continued. Tommy had tried to humiliate him with words. Words filled with hatred and ignorance. Tommy had tried to frighten him with violence. But Bruce didn't respond to hate with hate. He responded with control, with calmness, and only when he absolutely had to defend himself. Only then. Did he use his skill? A young voice called out from the crowd. How was Bruce not afraid? Tommy had a gun. Bruce smiled, a genuine smile, not mocking or superior, but warm. He admitted something that surprised many. He was afraid. Of course he was afraid. A gun is a deadly weapon. Fear is a natural human response. But fear, he explained, can be controlled just like the body can be controlled. Through training. Through breathing. Through focus. Fear is a signal that tells you to be alert, to be careful. It's not a command that tells you to run or freeze or submit. An older Chinese gentleman stepped forward from the crowd. He was well-dressed, clearly a person of some standing in the community. He addressed Bruce formally, calling him Mr. Lee. His son, he said, had told him about Bruce's teaching, about how Bruce taught differently than the traditional masters. And the man had a question. Did Bruce really teach non-Chinese students? A murmur went through the crowd. This was controversial. In 1965, traditional kung fu was closely guarded within the Chinese community. The old masters believed that teaching outsiders was a betrayal, that kung fu should remain a secret, an advantage, something that belonged exclusively to Chinese people. Bruce's answer was clear and uncompromising. He taught anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of skin color, country of origin, or language spoken. Martial arts, like truth, don't belong to one race. They belong to everyone. This statement caused more murmurs, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disapproval. But everyone was listening. A young girl, maybe 16, asked if Bruce would teach them. Bruce explained that he taught those who were ready to learn. But not just techniques, philosophy, not just how to fight, but why not to fight. An old veteran, a man who had seen combat in World War II, spoke up. He warned Bruce to be careful. Men like Tommy Malone don't forget. They don't forgive. They come back, often with friends, often with weapons. Bruce acknowledged this was possible. But when Tommy came back, if he came back, he would come back with a lesson learned. That violence isn't a path to respect. That true strength comes from developing yourself, not from tearing others down. The wail of a police siren interrupted the conversation. A patrol car pulled into the alley, lights flashing. Sergeant Patrick O'Brien stepped out, an Irish cop in his 50s who had worked the Chinatown beat for over a decade. He knew the neighborhood, knew the players, and had a generally good relationship with the community. But a call about a man with a gun drew his immediate attention. When he asked what happened, 100 voices tried to answer at once. O'Brien held up his hand for quiet and picked someone to speak, the older gentleman who had questioned Bruce earlier. The man explained, a thug had accosted this young man, Mr. Lee, with racial insults. Then the thug had pulled a gun and threatened him. And Mr. Lee had defended himself. O'Brien's eyebrows rose. Defended himself? Against a gun. He looked at Bruce with new interest. Where was the gunman now? Bruce explained that the man had left. The situation was resolved. No one was seriously injured. O'Brien was skeptical. Someone pulls a gun on you and the situation is just resolved? How exactly did that work? Bruce calmly explained that he had disarmed the attacker and defended himself using minimal necessary force. The man had then left with his friends. That was all. The sergeant looked at the crowd for confirmation. 100 heads nodded. Multiple voices chimed in with details. How fast Bruce moved, how the gun flew through the air, how it was the most incredible thing they'd ever seen. O'Brien held up his hand again for quiet. He asked about the gun. Bruce explained that the attacker's friends had retrieved it. Bruce had been careful not to touch it himself. He didn't want to end up facing charges for illegal possession of someone else's weapon. O'Brien actually smiled at this. "Smart thinking," he said. He asked Bruce to describe the attacker. Bruce provided a detailed description of Tommy Malone. As he spoke, O'Brien's expression changed. He clearly knew exactly who Bruce was talking about. "Tommy Malone," O'Brien confirmed. "Well known to the police, multiple arrests, assault, illegal gambling, extortion." They would be having a conversation with Mr. Malone very soon. Then O'Brien looked at Bruce with a new kind of respect. He'd heard about Bruce Lee. His partner's son wanted to learn karate, or was it kung fu, and had mentioned Bruce's name. Bruce corrected him gently. He taught Ch0ng, a free-flowing style, effective and adaptable. And yes, the officer's partner was welcome to bring his son to learn. O'Brien seemed surprised. Welcome, even though the boy wasn't Chinese? Bruce repeated what he had told the crowd. He taught everyone. Martial arts are universal. O'Brien closed his notebook. It seemed like Bruce had handled the situation well. About 100 people would be telling the story of what happened here. He suggested that Bruce try to keep the story accurate. With a knowing smile, O'Brien got back in his patrol car and drove away. As the crowd slowly dispersed, many people approached Bruce individually. Each had a story, a question, a request. The young student introduced himself as David Chen. He begged Bruce to teach him. Bruce told him to come to the school, Wednesday at 6 p.m., Grant Avenue 728, second floor above Mr. Wang's tea shop. If David was serious, Bruce would be there. David promised he would be there. Absolutely. No question. A young woman approached, American, blonde hair, early 20s. She introduced herself as Linda Emery. Her brother James was one of Bruce's students. Bruce remembered James, a dedicated student with good focus. Linda said her brother had told her about Bruce's teaching, but she hadn't realized. She paused, searching for words. Hadn't realized what? Bruce asked with a slight smile. How principled he was, she finally said. How brave. What he did today wasn't just about fighting. It was about the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the values he demonstrated. Bruce thanked her, but deflected the praise. Courage and principle aren't special, he said. Everyone has them. They just need to develop them. Linda asked if Bruce taught women. This was 1965. Most martial arts schools didn't. Bruce's smile widened. Of course he taught women. Anyone who wanted to learn was welcome. Kung Fu isn't about physical strength. It's about intelligence, technique, understanding principles. Linda said she would see him Wednesday then. What no one in that moment knew, what couldn't be known, was that Linda Emery would eventually become Linda Lee. Bruce's wife, the mother of his children. But that story was still unfolding. As the last of the crowd left, Bruce walked past Mr. Wang's tea shop. The old man rushed out. The whole street was talking about what happened, Mr. Wang said. Everyone was amazed. The gun, the speed, the way Bruce stood up to a man twice his size. Bruce gently corrected him. Size isn't important. Technique is important. Speed is important. Timing is important. Mr. Wang shook his head. Maybe for Bruce, that was true. But for ordinary people, for the immigrants and their children who faced disrespect and discrimination every day, Bruce had become something more than just a good fighter. He had become a symbol, proof that they didn't have to accept being pushed around, that they could stand tall, that they had the right to dignity. Bruce hadn't sought to be a hero, he protested. Heroes rarely do, Mr. Wang replied. They just do what's right. And then people recognize it for what it is. Go home and rest, Mr. Wang advised. Tomorrow there would be many people at the school's door. And he was right. 2 months later, Bruce Lee's school was full. 20 students, Chinese, American, Black, Hispanic, 3 women. All ages from 16 to 45. all wearing simple training clothes, all listening intently as Bruce demonstrated a technique. The principle is simple, Bruce explained. You don't block a punch with force against force. You redirect the energy. He demonstrated with a student, a fluid movement that turned an attack into empty air. A student asked, how long did Bruce train to achieve that speed? Bruce's answer, he was still training, every day, and would continue training until he died. Mastery isn't a destination, it's a journey. He paused, looking at all his students. Many of them, he said, were here because of the story from 2 months ago. That was fine. But he wanted them to understand something clearly. Complete attention from every student. What he taught wasn't how to win fights. It was how to avoid fights, how to live with dignity, confidence, and self-control. Physical technique was a tool, but character was the goal. David Chen asked, but what if they had to defend themselves, like Bruce did that day? Bruce's answer was careful. If you must, not want to, not choose to, but must, then use the minimum force necessary to resolve the situation. No more, no less. And always, always try to avoid conflict first. Linda Emery asked, when the man pulled the gun, how was Bruce not afraid? Bruce smiled. Who said he wasn't afraid? He was terrified. But fear is like pain. It's a signal, not a command. You acknowledge it, you observe it, but you don't let it control your actions. He walked to a wooden training dummy, the Ch0ng dummy he used for practice. This dummy, he said, isn't alive, but it's useful for training. Why? Because it doesn't react with fear. It doesn't react with anger. It doesn't react with ego. It simply receives strikes and gives you honest feedback. That's the ideal in combat, Bruce explained. React without ego, without anger, without fear. Only with pure technique and presence in the moment. He demonstrated a series of rapid strikes on the dummy. Each movement was precise, economical, efficient. The people on the street that day, Bruce continued, saw the end of the story. But the end is just a moment. What matters is what came before. How many years of training? How many thousands of hours of practice? How much discipline? How much thought? That's what he was offering here. Not a short story of victory, but a long story of self-mastery. Now, he said with a clap of his hands, everyone into ready stance. They would begin with basic blocks. The training session began. But for Bruce, this was more than training. This was a mission. The story of Bruce Lee and the street thug spread through Chinatown like wildfire. With each retelling, new details emerged. In some versions, there were 5 guns. In others, Bruce jumped 10 feet in the air. In still others, the fight lasted half an hour. But the people who were actually there, those 100 witnesses, they knew the truth. They knew they had seen a young man who refused to let hatred define the moment, who avoided violence until the last possible second, who, when forced to act, acted with precision, control, and minimum force. They knew they had seen not just a fighter, but a philosopher in action. Bruce Lee continued teaching. His ideas, Ch0ng, continued growing. His school accepted more and more students from all backgrounds. 5 years later, he would be in Hollywood, breaking down racial barriers that had kept Asian actors out of leading roles for decades. 9 years later, he would be the biggest martial arts star in the world, inspiring millions. 30 years later, he would still be inspiring millions, though he had been dead for most of those years. 50 years later, his philosophy, his movies, his legacy would still be changing lives around the world. But those who knew him in those early days, his first students, the people of Chinatown who watched him grow, they knew the truth. Bruce Lee didn't become a legend on that day in the alley when he disarmed the thug. He became a legend by living his principles every single day. Dignity, discipline, constant learning, breaking down barriers, and refusing, always refusing, to allow someone else's fear, hatred, or ignorance to define him. Do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. A wise man can learn more from a foolish question than a fool can learn from a wise answer. The successful warrior is the average man with laser-like focus. Be water, my friend. These weren't just words Bruce Lee spoke. They were words he lived. And on that day, in 1965, on a narrow alley in San Francisco's Chinatown, 100 people didn't just see a fight. They saw what it looks like to live with principle. They saw what dignity looks like in the face of hatred. They saw what true strength really means. And that lesson, that moment, became a legend. Because some moments are more than just moments. They're teaching points. They're turning points. They're proof that one person, armed with nothing but skill, courage, and an unshakable belief in human dignity, can stand against hatred and win. Not by crushing the opponent, but by refusing to be crushed. Not by responding to violence with greater violence, but by responding with exactly the necessary amount of control. Not by seeking revenge, but by seeking to preserve dignity, both your own and, ultimately, even your opponent's. That was Bruce Lee's gift to the world. Not just spectacular kicks and punches, but a philosophy of life that said, you are worthy of respect, you are capable of excellence, you can be more than the limitations others try to place on you. And on that autumn afternoon in 1965, when a street thug tried to use fear and hatred as weapons, Bruce Lee showed the world what happens when someone refuses to accept those weapons. What happens is simple and powerful and eternal. You become legendary. Not because of what you destroyed, but because of what you refuse to let be destroyed. Human dignity, justice, and the belief that we can all be better than our worst impulses. That's the real story of what happened that day. That's the legend. Estimated reading time, approximately 20 minutes at natural speaking pace. Tone, documentary/journalistic narration, suitable for reading aloud as if presenting a news story or historical account. Structure, complete narrative arc from context to confrontation to resolution to lasting impact. Message, the story of dignity, control, and courage in the face of hatred and violence, told through the lens of Bruce Lee's philosophy and real experiences with discrimination in 1960s America.